The weather at the moment in the UK is absolutely awful. It's the kind of weather that makes you want to sit in front of the fire, drink a nice big mug of coffee, and eat an ungodly amount of chocolate-based snacks from M&S. So when I was looking through the Steam Workshop page, I came across this mod and it made me feel warm and cozy and made me smile. Introducing Epochs Pyrinth. Epochs Pyrinth. Epochs Pyrinth? However it's pronounced. A mod that made me feel cozy and warm inside, and the warmth that came from this, I just had to review it just because of the weather, really. So let's get into things and start with the content. So let's start by looking at the content of the Steam Workshop page. What is there and what do we see? So we start off with a thumbnail and a couple of pictures here. I really like the design here, very simple and sleek, and shows everything off in game. Getting into the bulk of things, we have a full contents with descriptions, we have pictures, we have absolutely everything we want. Now, interestingly, the only thing that I'm missing out on in this Steam Workshop page is how do I pronounce the name of this mod? That is the only thing I can think that is missing here. Otherwise, this is perfect. So what does this mod actually add? This mod adds the brand new resource called the Pyrinth. This is a heat-based resource that we can mine, and we get a very small yield back, and we can use it to create a few select things. For example, we have the wall-mounted torch, a medieval-themed heating element that provides a little bit of heat, a Pyrinth-themed brazier as well. I really love the design of this one. Pyrinth resource itself that we can look at and pick up off the ground and what we get from mining the Pyrinth ore, and then we have a Pyrinth sword. So there's not very much content added here, but what is added here fills a very specific niche within the medieval era, which is what this mod is aimed at. However, I do genuinely think this fits in quite nicely with actual Rimworld as well. It gives us an extra resource to mine and an extra way to decorate our bases, which I'm always a fan of. So looking at things a little bit more closely and in more detail, this mod adds 3 new light sources, 1 new heating element, and 1 brand new weapon, as well as the ore and the mineable resource that comes from that. We have the 2 new torches, a normal torch that goes on the ground, and then we have a wall-mounted torches. The unique ability of these is not only is it then made out of this brand new ore and stone, it's not also able to be refueled. It is infinitely generating. So in the medieval era, you'll have this infinitely generating light source, which is fantastic, really valuable for the time. And in modern era, we have a red torch that just looks really cool and we don't have to think about refueling it. The benefits are pretty much endless, honestly. We then have the brand new brazier equivalent. It's one big Pyrinth ore coming out of this steel brazier. I love the design of this. I think this is really cool, really unique, and fits in perfect with the medieval era and that kind of fairy theming and wizardry and things like that. Then we have the brand new Pyrinth heater. This is very simple, kind of the passive cooler, but for heating. A little bit dwarven, a little bit thematically on point for it. I actually think this fits really well with base game vanilla Rimworld as well, because it is very basic looking. Matches really well the passive cooler. Then lastly, we have the Pyrinth sword. Really love the design of this one. It almost matches the Pyrinth brazier with the way that the ore looks and the sword looks. It all kind of matches this up together and looks extremely well thought of. So how do we access all these brand new things, and how are we going to actually implement them into our game, and how easy are these going to be accessed? Now, in terms of research, the only research that is required here is complex furniture and long blades. Obviously very early tech, because this is designed to be played in a medieval playthrough. But does this hold up in base game vanilla Rimworld as well? I think it does. It adds a nice design. It's not something we have to worry about or think about, and does give us that variation for various different playthroughs. So that's going to be all the content that's added by this mod, and I'm going to be looking at this from the perspective of, yes, there could be more content here, but I really like what's going on here. From the medieval perspective, this mod is amazing. It's an essential, if you ask me, for if you're playing with a medieval playthrough, because it just fits so nicely, and the addition of having something that heats up rooms and you don't have to refuel is super handy for that era, especially coming into the winters where we don't have electric heaters and things like that. And when we've got this in actual just Rimworld, it's also just a really convenient items to have. Not having to refuel things, not having to worry about them. It's just a super convenient mod to be playing with, and that's not even taking into account the brand new weapon that is also just really cool. But there could obviously be more added here. There is 3 light sources, we have 1 heating element, and then 1 weapon. We could arguably have a couple more weapons here. We could arguably have a different variation of the heater to be a little bit more powerful. We could arguably have a couple more light sources and things like that. There is room for improvement here, and there's room for growth if the mod creator decides that that's what they want to do. I know that me personally would really appreciate just maybe a couple more weapons added, maybe just a couple more things added. It's teetering on the verge of, it's showing us what it could be providing to us without giving it to us. It's a little bit of a cock tease, I'm not gonna lie. I want a little bit more from this mod, despite how good what we've already got is, just a little bit more please. So for content, I'm going to be giving it a very solid 8 out of 10. I just think it needs a little bit more. So next, let's move on and look at the quality of everything added by this mod. And we have got an extremely strong start here. The standing Pyrinth torch here is so good. It's like a warm ice cream cone. It looks really, really good. I love the quality here, and I love the design that it takes after the Pyrinth ore after we mine it. And I must say, the particle effects here are, ooh, they're so cozy. I absolutely love the design of this. Now, I understand that obviously if you have quite a few of these down on the ground, it will probably affect your game. But honestly, I'm taking the hit, honestly, just to have to be able to look at this on the occasion. Next, we have the Pyrinth wall-mounted torch. And this one, for me, yes, I like the design of it. It looks just like the standing one, but just on the wall. But for some reason, the Pyrinth ore that is attached to the torch looks significantly better than the actual, like, ice cream cone for this torch. I don't know what it is. It just doesn't quite work, and I don't know why. Then next, we have the creme de la creme. Just like the Pyrinth standing torch, the Pyrinth brazier is, ooh, it's so, ooh. It makes me feel good and warm. The particle effects really give that effect of like a crackling campfire late at night. I want to like toast marshmallows around this brazier. It gives me a good feeling looking at this brazier, placing it down, and it feels like something that we can huddle around at night. I love the design choices with this. I could arguably say the brazier itself could do with maybe a few more details, but it's still incredibly good. Then we have the Pyrinth heater, and this kind of looks like just a big standing lantern torch thing. I get what it's trying to do. The design isn't too bad, the quality's not too bad. Maybe something different, I don't know. It doesn't quite resemble a heater for some reason. Then we have the Pyrinth longsword, and unfortunately the colonists tried to move this halfway through recording this. I love the design for this. I love the way it takes after the Pyrinth brazier with the way the ore looks. I love that it follows a specific design theming as well, and we can see this played on the shimmering on the top layer, which is an amazing design. The hilt of the sword, it looks slightly strange, and I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of it because it kind of looks like a butt plug, but it still is an incredible design. Then lastly, we have the Pyrinth mineable ore, and then we have the Pyrinth ore itself once it's been mined. Now, I love the color choice here. I think it really stands out and it pops amongst the rest of the Rimworld, and I think the color choice fits really well with medieval Rimworld, in fact. The only thing I will say, that the only thing I have noticed here, we're not sure if this is a me problem or if this is an issue with every single ore that's in Rimworld, but there is a strange square box around the individual Pyrinth ore here. Not sure what's going on with that, but I mean, it might just be because there's just one down, and realistically, you're not going to have this problem very often. I love all the design choices here. Fantastic. So that's going to be it for the quality section here, and as you can tell, I am a big fan of this. I love the intricate little details of the particle effects coming off of the Pyrinth torches and the Pyrinth brazier. It's so nice and warm and lovely. It makes me smile. It's a cozy experience and something that I can just see myself using for little farmsteads and homesteads out in the wild, for caves that feel cold and need that little bit of warmth to it. These are perfect for that. There are a couple of hiccups here and there, and I think there are a couple of things that could be improved. The hilt of the sword looks a little bit too much like a butt plug, and I think that the wall-mounted torch needs a little bit of improvement, and I'm not too sure where, but there just seems something off with it. So for the quality here, I'm generally extremely impressed with what we've got. We could just do with a little bit more and a little bit of a finishing touch for a couple of items here. So I'm going to be giving the quality here a 8 out of 10. So next, as we will look at the balancing of everything added by this mod. Now, on the surface of things, you'd probably say, well, this is just a mod that adds a few torches, a heating element, and one weapon. There's absolutely no way that there are any balancing issues. Well, there isn't really. So let's get into things, and let's start by looking at the torches and the lighting elements themselves. Now, unfortunately, it has to be said, the standing Pyrinth torch, the wall-mounted Pyrinth torch, the Pyrinth brazier, and the Pyrinth heater are all inherently overpowered. They're all inherently unbalanced for one reason altogether. They do not require refueling, which in Rimworld, you obviously have to refuel your campfires, you have to refuel your braziers, you have to refuel your fueled stoves, you have to refuel your chem fuel generators. All of these things require refueling. Now, obviously, these are made out of stone, which is very difficult to refuel, really. So I guess for lore purposes, it makes sense. And honestly, does it really matter if we have to not refuel some of these torches and things like that? In the medieval era, it just gives us that extra option. Now, me personally, the only way that I could find this being overpowered is if the Pyrinth resource is extremely abundant. Because the torches at the lowest cost take 10 Pyrinth for the wall-mounted Pyrinth torch, all the way up to 35 Pyrinth for the brazier. What the expectation here is not too easy to access. So that's what I wanted to test. So in order to test this, what I did is I wanted to just load into a normal map. What I did was I spawned into a temperate forest with hills, and I wanted to just see how much Pyrinth was actually going to actually spawn on the map. Is it going to be absolutely abundant like steel? Is it going to be something like plasteel that maybe is only one ore on the map? Is this something that we're going to have way too much of and we're not actually going to value in our playthroughs? So spawning in, immediately we see a couple sticking out of the mountains, and I thought, okay, a couple, that's not too bad. Going into dev mode and defogging, there's a couple more that I've spotted within after defogging everything, and that's it. There's not loads everywhere. This isn't a resource that we're going to have in absolute abundance like steel. It's kind of on the same level, I'd say, as jade, if you ask me. It's not loads, but it's definitely enough that you'll have a little bit in your stockpile at all times. Unless you're actually using it, then it'll go pretty quickly. This isn't too bad at all. You're probably going to be able to get these from traders and things like that, but it's not that, like, abundant, nor it's just perfect. Like, I can't find words because it's perfect, right? There's not too much, there's not too little. It's just the right amount that I'm expecting for something that's a little bit on the more powerful side. So with the resource cost in mind of all the Pyrinth items, let's move on and look at the Pyrinth sword. The Pyrinth sword is obviously going to be the biggest point of balancing here because it's an actual weapon that does damage and actually does fire damage as well. So firstly, let's cover the resource cost. 100 Pyrinth in order to make this sword. Now, as I've just shown you, there isn't too much Pyrinth spawned on each map. We could probably get a few hundred from each map, and that'll be about it. So in terms of balancing for actually accessing Pyrinth, it's absolutely fine. You might have 1 or 2 colonists with these things, and in the medieval playthrough, you might want to prioritize heating and lighting. You might have 1 colonist with a Pyrinth sword. In terms of resource cost, it's perfect, but with this resource cost in mind, I am expecting the Pyrinth sword to be quite powerful. So in order to test how powerful the Pyrinth sword is, I wanted to test things a little bit more thematically. Here I have the Pyrinth sword of a good quality, a steel longsword of good quality, and a steel spear of good quality. The Pyrinth blade has got 11.07 melee damage per second with an armor penetration factor of 36%. The steel longsword has a melee damage per second of 9.46 and a melee armor penetration of 36%, and the steel spear has got a melee damage per second of 8.08 and the melee armor penetration factor of 42%. So the expectation here is the Pyrinth blade will kill things the quickest, whilst the steel spear will kill things the slowest. But if they're more armored, it should theoretically do pretty well as well. So for these tests, what I'll be doing is using 1 colonist with 10 in melee, picking up the weapons, and it will be then attacking a colonist with a simple steel helmet and then steel plate armor, because once again, it's pretty thematic, right? So firstly, the Pyrinth blade. This does a pretty good job. It causes them to burn and start running away and everything, really handy for in battle, and it kills them pretty quickly, very expected. Then we have the steel longsword, and arguably it killed quicker, if you ask me. I think the problem with the Pyrinth blade, especially comparing it to the steel longsword, is that once it does the burn damage, the target immediately runs away. So you kind of then have to chase them down. In a bigger combat situation with more colonists, then it probably won't have that effect. But in a certain situation where you're just attacking one thing, it does end up meaning that it will take longer to kill. Then lastly, this steel spear, and as you'd imagine, it did take the longest out of all 3 of these things, but it didn't do too badly, honestly. Because of the increased armor penetration, it does end up doing a little bit more damage because it does have that increased factor. So in terms of balancing, I think the Pyrinth blade is actually absolutely fine. Yes, it does have an increased melee damage per second, and yes, it does also do burn damage, but when you take into the fact that if you do attack somebody, they'll just run away because they're on fire, it then ends up taking longer to do the damage. So in a one-off hit, yes, arguably it does more damage, but you could also actually argue that having a steel spear of an even better quality or an even better resource could actually do more damage in one individual hit. And then with the torches and everything not being refuelable, I mean, it is ultimately just light sources and things, and whilst it is inherently overpowered, it's not that bad. Like, it would be pretty harsh of me to then mark this mod down because it's overpowered, because it is, like, it's not that bad. So for balancing here, I'm very happy giving this a 9 out of 10. So next, let's move on to compatibility. Are there any bugs I need to let you know about and how this fit in with your playthroughs? Now, in terms of bugs, I personally had absolutely no issues whatsoever. Everything worked absolutely as intended. Looking on the Steam Workshop page, it doesn't look like anybody is also reporting any bugs anywhere. There's a couple of people asking questions, and then for some reason, there's a lot of people just role-playing and talking about the lore and things, which is cool, but What? Seems to be absolutely no issues with this mod. The one bug error that I did potentially read was the ore not spawning in with medieval overhaul, which I mean is probably down to the mod pack more than anything. Next, how is this going to work in our playthroughs? Well, unfortunately, because this is a thematic mod that's pretty much only intended for use within the medieval theme, it doesn't perform very well in terms of how it's going to fit in with your playthroughs. I do personally think it would fit really well with a more modern era playstyle if you're having sort of a comfy and cozy farm playthrough, but that's pretty much it. This mod is perfect, like perfect for the medieval theme, but you've got to push yourself and play into the medieval theme, otherwise it's literally just no point using this mod. That is the only downside, is that you are forced to literally fit within a certain theme unless you're really going to sort of use it for a playthrough that it doesn't necessarily work in. So for compatibility, there are no bugs, like this is perfect, but it doesn't fit in with enough playthroughs for me to necessarily recommend it all the time. So I'm going to be giving the compatibility here a 6 out of 10. So next, let's move on to my mod recommendations to go with this mod. Now, as I've just said, unfortunately, because this mod is literally designed to go with the medieval era, you're kind of forced to then only use mods that reflect that and respect that in terms of your playthroughs. So my mod recommendations here are totally designed around using this in a thematically medieval playthrough. Starting with Medieval Overhaul. This is just an amazing mod. I've used this mod in a playthrough before, and honestly, it's a playthrough and a series I look back on to this day for how amazing it was. Absolutely fantastic mod. Next, we have Medieval Melee Sounds. This mod came up on my Steam Workshop page because its Steam Workshop page seems to be a little bit broken at the moment. This was released last year and it seems to be a very interesting mod to use within the theming. Next we have Dragon's Descent, like dragons, medieval, fiery things, like it's perfect. Then we have Desert Xenotypes Stoneborn. I really felt like the whole stone and ore stuff with all the printh and the mining and everything just fit in perfectly. Then lastly, we have Fortifications Medieval, just so you can build a really cool castle with all the braziers and everything, and with the royalty DLC, it would be amazing. So what I've been able to do is recommend some very important core mods to go in a medieval playthrough, because this mod is kind of one that you'd add into your playthroughs rather than one that you'd focus things around, which I think is really important, because despite this being a mod that is medieval themed, it's still a mod that you can just chuck in because it's not really a core mod that you then want to focus your playthroughs around. So for my mod recommendations here, it's not as bad as you might think, but it's definitely not the best, because it doesn't unfortunately fit in with very many playthroughs, and you are obviously kind of forced to use a medieval playthrough. So I'm going to be giving the mod recommendations here today a 5 out of 10. So for my conclusion and writing up what score I've given this mod, I was genuinely surprised at how low it's actually scored. This mod is fantastic. It's really well built, and I love the quality and the design choices that have been made by Det here. It's amazing. I love the graphical choice of using particle effects around the Pyrinth brazier and the Pyrinth standing torch. I think it is a fantastic choice, and it really makes me feel warm and cozy, and it makes me feel good using this mod, and it would fit in perfectly with a medieval overhaul playthrough, and that's where I think this mod would thrive. But that's the problem, right? It only kind of fits in with that thematic playthrough. Yes, you could potentially use this in certain thematic playthroughs that are a bit more modern, but you won't quite get the same effect, unfortunately, which is where it's been marked down, unfortunately. So for content, I gave it 8 out of 10, quality 8 out of 10, balancing 9 out of 10, compatibility 6 out of 10, my mod recommendation score was 5 out of 10, giving it the grand total score of 36 out of 50, which is an extremely solid B-rated mod. I would have loved to have rated this higher, and if you are using a medieval playthrough and a medieval mod pack, you need to use this mod because it fits perfectly and makes your life so much easier and gives you that depth and breadth to having more heating elements and more props and things to make your bases look better and more intricate and more interesting. But don't necessarily listen to my opinion. Please check out this mod for yourself because it is fantastic, and formulate your own opinions. So you have enjoyed today's video, consider liking, subscribing, and make sure you tell your mum about me. See you next time. Thank you.